Sure. Yeah, that's fine. I may not even need it, although sometimes I can be known to go on longer than I was supposed to. I am the co-chair of the Friends of Cornwall School group here in Cornwall, Vermont, which is, essentially our PTA type group. And I've also been involved in the last year and a half or so in discussions around potential school consolidation. We are part of the Addison Central School District, and we have 7 elementary schools in our town. Prior to our merger in 2016 into a unified union district, we operated jointly with the other 6 schools, a middle and high school in Middlebury, and that was its own union district even before we became a unified union district. And that has gone quite well, and I think most folks are happy with that situation. When we voted to merge into a unified union district, there was some discussion around the question of school closure. And I think we were sort of under the impression, at least I was, that was not really the focus of merging into a unified union district, but rather that we would seek other ways as a unified union district to address efficiency and equity. Unfortunately, it seems that post-merger, the discussion moved pretty quickly toward school closure. A consultant was hired to review the buildings and facilities within our district, and has now come out with recommendations this year to close 4 of the 7 schools, so a majority of those in our district. We, in the meantime, some of us who've been involved in the issue have tried to petition. We're one of a handful of unified union districts that does not have a provision in our Articles of Agreement that would require a vote of a town to approve prior to the closure of a school. We petitioned the board and to potentially warn to the voters a change to our articles that would have inserted that requirement. And unfortunately, the board chose not to warn that to the voters. So that was actually, I believe, a decision made earlier this year. It gets a little fuzzy with COVID. So that's kind of where things stand. And the board has indicated in terms of timeline that the hope is to draft a plan that would involve closure of a majority of our elementary schools by not the closure, but the writing of the plan by the end of this year, calendar year, and then to vote on that plan by town meeting day, which wouldn't really give us much time to say take other routes like elections to try to address this issue. So unfortunately, I think those of us who would like to focus more on the other benefits of being part of a unified union district, we were a voluntary merger. In fact, I think we were the earliest in the state, but it's certainly among them. We are looking at the possibility of withdrawal. The 4 towns that are slated to have their schools closed are looking at that. We're a funny animal in that sense because we actually would rather not. I think that there are, well, I shouldn't speak for everyone, but I think the general feeling among the folks that I'm engaged with is it's not really that we don't want to be part of a unified union structure. We voted early to go ahead with it. It's just that we feel that Act 46 was pretty clear that its intent was not to close small schools. If you look at Section 3, as I'm sure you're all intimately aware of. Oh, sure.
I have to interrupt you for a moment. Suzanne, any other public indicating an interest to be heard?
No, John.
Thank you. You may continue another 5 minutes, Mr. Kramer, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay. In any case, that's where we are. We do have a petition to move forward with withdrawal here in Cornwall. There's one in Ripton that's before their select board now. Ours has gathered sufficient signatures, but it's not in front of our select board yet. And then there are two other towns, Shoreham and Weybridge, that are exploring this possibility, but are not quite there yet. So that's where things stand. I think the reason I wanted to come on today is we're aware of some of the discussions around Reedsboro and Halifax that occurred at the August and September SBE meetings. And we know that withdrawal is quite the process. We would need an approval here in our own town. We would then need a vote of the other 6 towns, as would all of the other towns that are looking at this. And only then would we kind of get to the SBE. So if we're going to go forward with it, we'd like ideally to have some clarity around is it worth the effort? And is there going to end up being a lot of subjectivity in the end around that approval process, which would be sort of a third level of approval? Right now, we understand that the statute's pretty clear in terms of how it works, but we also understand that there's some concern that not addressing withdrawal may have been an oversight in the drafting of Act 46. So we would just request that if there's an effort to suggest to the legislature a change to that statute, that it at least be done in a way that continues to make it pretty clear what the standards are, because I think our concern is going forward with our town and then all the other local towns in the district, and then getting to that third level. If we've gone through all that, and then it's sort of a subjective process, it weights it very differently for us than as things stand right now. So that would be our request. We understand from the chair that the decision that was made around Halifax in particular was not so much around substantive review of their sustainability, but rather whether students would have a school to go to. And that's fine with us if it stays that way. But if it's going to expand beyond that, I think our request would be that it simply trigger a substantive review of the educational quality standards under Section 165, because that's laid out pretty clearly, and we would feel like we could judge that. If it becomes more subjective than that, then it does start to potentially change our calculation. So I think that would be our request.
Very good. Thank you. Oliver, you have a comment? Oliver, you're muted. We need to have you on mute.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
So thank you, Mr. Kramer, for your very thoughtful comments and approach to this. So just a couple of quick things, as I think that the chair had previously indicated, the legislature gives us the parameters from which we have to work within. So I think, the sense of the board is simply that, we need the legislature to tell us how they want us to operate. We're not proffering a specific recommendation. But I will point back to the original goals of Act 46 and the parameters. And if you're looking to sort of divine some guidance, I think that would be a good place to start, because that was a subject of quite a bit of litigation, as I'm sure you know, that was upheld by the Supreme Court. And it very clearly dealt with this, with the premise that what the preferred structure is. So I think it's fair to say over time there will be movement of districts from, say, one unified district to another. But I think, the spirit of Act 46 was to create larger governance structures, not smaller governance structures. So I would just encourage you to think about that. And then the final thing is, if your real concern is about the closure of a school, another avenue that you may want to pursue, because it sounds like your issue isn't with the governance structure, it's with the closure of the school. You could petition the new district to look at revising the articles of agreement to provide some protections, and that might be a way to really address the core issue you're concerned about. So I'll leave it at that.
Very good, thank you, Oliver.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if there's a moment to respond quickly or not.
Let me just point out to Oliver that indeed the communities did petition their new district for provisions such as this, and for some reason the board never put that to a vote, so it was sort of died a mourning. That's the point you wish to make, Mr. Kramer?
That was one of the only other one actually is just to confirm. As I say, we're a funny animal. I think we'd actually prefer to stay unified union district. That may not be true for all that are looking to withdraw, but as you say, that's not our issue. We actually like being part of the structure, and as you say, Mr. Chair, we did. The reason that was given for not warning it was that the articles around school closure were seen by council to the board and the district as being within the purview of the board and not the electorate, so that the board could choose to warn it to voters, but was not required to. There was some discussion at a board meeting as to whether to go forward with that warning, and it was decided to keep that authority within the purview of the board and not warn that to voters.
Okay, thank you. Bill Mathis, you have a comment? Have to unmute, please.
Yes, could you go further with this? They having a petition which they chose not to put on the agenda. I didn't think that they had a choice in those matters.
Mr. Kramer, do you want to respond?
Sure. So generally, there isn't, but as I said, in this case, there was a legal opinion which was written, so I could, and it's public, so I'd be happy to forward that if that's helpful. It could explain the rationale. But essentially, the legal opinion said that for this petition, because the subject matter of the petition fell within the purview of the authorities reserved to the board and not to the electorate, that in that particular case, the board had discretion. It wasn't that they couldn't warn it or shouldn't warn it, but that they could choose whether to warn it or not, because it was their area of authority and not the electorates, and they chose not to do so.
For what it's worth, I believe that in Harwood District, a similar initiative